We are thrilled to kick off our keynote series with today's panel discussion, Advancing the Profession and NSH Advocacy. As many of you in the audience are aware, histotechnology is not immune to the workforce shortages facing all laboratory professionals. Coupled with the lack of recognition in federal regulation, today's panel will discuss important efforts NSH and its membership has made in the last 18 months to combat these challenges. We hope that at the end of this conversation, you'll be encouraged to use the resources and information provided to participate in the advocacy process. Without further ado, let's begin by introducing our distinguished panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. Louis Charaboga. Dr. Charaboga serves as a research assistant professor of pathology at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. He is also director of the Histology and Immunohistochemistry Laboratory in the Office of Science and Research. His 30-year career began in the field of immunohistochemistry, amassing a large data set of IHC markers and protocols. Now he is working in the development of multiplexing IHC, imaging assays, translational research, and spectroscopic tools for anatomic pathology. As someone once said of Louis regarding his commitment to advancing the profession, he never tires, he never gives up. Welcome, Louis. Our next panelist is Ms. Elizabeth Chapala. Ms. Chapala is an owning partner at Premier Laboratory, a contract histology laboratory in Longmont, Colorado. She has 40 years experience working in laboratories and hospitals, conducting both clinical and research histology and IHC. She's a member of many organizations, including NSH, ASCP, CSH, and the Colorado Bioscience Association. Ms. Chapala is an accomplished, knowledgeable speaker with well over 80 conventions, symposiums, and webinars on her resume. She is so passionate and committed to educating the histology community that NSH often finds itself reminding her that there are only 24 hours in a day, and for that reason, we are very grateful for her dedication to carve out a portion of those 24 hours on the topic we are discussing. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Tim. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Tim Morkin. Many of you may recognize his name from the NSH member community, The Block. He is often one of the first and most helpful voices answering all types of technical questions, and that is because of the vast experience his career has spanned. He began his work in electron microscopy here in the United States. Eventually, he moved abroad and was managing and supervising the IHC and ISH lab at the King Faisal Specialist Hospital in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. After returning to the United States, he spent 5 years at the CDC and then moved into the biotech and regulatory sphere. Later, he returned to the world of EM when he took a position at the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center. We are very grateful for the experience and insight he brings to this topic. Last but certainly not least is Ms. Claire Thornton, the 2024 Histotech of the Year recipient. As you heard, Ms. Thornton is the lead immunohistochemistry histologist at Doll Chase Diagnostic Services. She has over a decade of advocacy experience being part of some of the earliest policy work from the NSH. Her positions included serving on the NSH Board of Directors and chair of the Policy and Procedures Task Force. She is also on the NSH CMS Laboratory Personnel Requirements RFI Task Force. On that task force, she's been fighting since 2018 to have histotechnology recognized as a profession and be brought under CLIAC. She brings a vast wealth of knowledge and hands-on experience in advocacy to the panel. With that, welcome to the panel, and let's begin.
Thank you. I'm going to get started and start talking to you about NSH advocacy. We thought we'd take this opportunity to talk to everybody about what we've been doing for the last 18 months, 2 years, because I think it's really, really important. And a lot of the work that we do is kind of behind the scenes, and you don't really get the opportunity to see how hard this task force has worked over the last 18 months for this organization. So why do we advocate? I mean, there's all different reasons in terms of why we want to advocate, but bottom line, what we do in histotechs in our profession and in individuals that are performing histology in our profession are going to be affected by public policy sometime during their career. And whether it's state licensure or CLIA regulations, the workforce shortages, educational programs that are available to us, federal legislation and other state and federal funding, we're going to be impacted by that. So the whole point of advocacy is there's power in numbers, and it's really important for us to have a voice and for histotechs to have a voice. The more individuals that we can say are in this profession, the more we're going to have recognition. And recognition does take time. So once we become more recognized and we work with other organizations, that can improve our salaries, it can increase the workforce, it can minimize that burnout for the individuals that we all work really, really hard, and we know how workforce shortages have impacted us. And basically, if we can increase that recognition and we can align with other organizations, our voice becomes stronger. So there's multiple issues facing the histology profession, and it comes from, I think, the bottom line, it's that lack of recognition. We do so much for patient care. What we do directly impacts how a patient is going to be treated, and yet most individuals, I mean, your medical professionals might know who we are, but a common individual going into the hospital or has a tissue removed or a tumor removed does not know that we're the ones that are actually making that determination or helping to make that determination in terms of what kind of treatment they'll be receiving. And that kind of comes from the lack of CLIA regulation and oversight. So currently, we're not regulated under CLIA. There's no CLIA oversight with respects to histology professionals, which then leads to lack of educational standards, lack of certification or state licensure, which can lead to workforce shortages. And there's other government things such like the SALSA Act and 529 plans. So those are kind of like the global issues that address the histology community. And recently, some of the more specific task or scope related issues in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis, whether immunohistochemistry is considered a stain or an assay. And then what has just recently been released is that FDA LDT rule and then VALID Act. So what is the Public Policy Task Force? So this task force was created in 2021 by the NSH Board of Directors, and it was charged in developing public policy strategy that aligned with the advocate pillar of NSH's strategic plan. And our mission as a task force is to collaborate and align with key organizations to educate and promote the profession and society, and to help us inform public policy decisions and government agencies on the impact that the histotechnology profession has on patient care. So how does the task force meet our mission statement? So we need to understand that there are differences between lobbying and advocacy. What NSH is doing is advocacy. And part of what we do is, a portion of what we do is develop concise position statements that support rationale and references. And what we want to do when we write these position statements is we want to make sure that we have supporting rationale and references. So we're very, we just look at it very closely to make sure that we have data available to make these public policy statements. And then we need to implement a system to actively monitor what's going on in terms of how and why we respond. And I'm going to give a couple examples. So we'll get emails into NSH or individuals posting on the block because we can't look and see everything. So we need you out there to have our eyes and our ears open, so if you see something that you think is impacting our profession or your work in your environment, that you contact us. So we, and Clara or Lewis is going to talk about this later in terms of some of our responses to CMS. But last year, just prior to the convention, Amanda Kelly posted something on the block about a CMS request for information. We didn't see it before, we hadn't heard about it before, but if she had not posted that, and if we didn't have the ability to check into it, we wouldn't have been able to respond. And so in terms of the timeliness of responses, sometimes it's like weeks in terms of the time it takes for us our need to respond to an issue that comes up. So at the convention, Louis and I sat down in the speaker ready room and kind of wrote a draft response to the CMS request. And then it went to Aubrey to kind of review it and take a look at it, and then it goes to the task force for them to take a look and review, and then it might go to the board. So all of us, it's a long process, but sometimes this has to be done in like a couple weeks. So the timeliness of the response is what's really, really important. But in order for us to respond, it's really important that we know if something comes up, and we can't always see it. We try to, but we are relying on our membership and histology professionals to help guide us and to tell us what's out there. And the other thing is that in order to amplify our voice, we need to be more effective. And so we've worked very, very hard in the last couple years to try to become more relevant. People are now coming to us, and other organizations are now coming to NSH for support and advice. So what we're doing is working, but it takes time. And then the other thing is we need to make sure that whatever we do is going to align with NSH's strategic plan. So some of the things that we do is the first thing is these public policy position statements. And public policy position statements are forward documents. They're accessible and distributed. Anybody can access them. And it's basically a way that we have a voice that we can help us, we advocate for the larger histology community that hopefully it'll benefit our profession. These are shared on the website. They're also in the app. All of our public policy statements are in the app, and they're available for download and sharing by NSH member, and actually any individual can access these public policy statements through the website. So we've had some completed public policy statements. I'm just going to review them very briefly because you can read the entire document online if you download it. So we have a public policy statement on workforce shortages, and basically that's just to increase visibility and guide regulation to make educational programs more accessible. We have a public policy statement on histology education, meaning that we believe that we need to have minimal education work requirements for a histotechnician, that we have a degree of training, accumulating in either licensure or certification. And then finally, we have the CLIA public policy position statement, and that basically states that we need to be recognized under CLIA as individuals that perform high complexity testing, and that labs that perform histology should be considered high complexity laboratories. And then we have a slew of stuff that's still on our plate to get done in terms of drafted public policy statements. So we have a support of licensure, so NSH supports licensure. We support national certification. We are developing a scope of work standard. What do we do? What do histotechs do on a day-to-day basis? And then we're doing a work standard on the histotechnicians and grossing. And I'm going to turn it over to Claire.
I'm going to say I'm not quite as talented as Liz speaking spontaneously, so I'm going off my notes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the specific things that we have responded to, these requests for information, RFIs, excuse me. So in November of 2018, I attended a CLIAC meeting to deliver oral comments bringing histology under CLIA oversight, proposed changes allowing nurses to direct high complexity labs, and physical degree changes, as in what is a physical degree. Before our oral comments even got underway, during their presentation, the representative from CMS declared they had received over 8,500 comments regarding allowing nurses to direct high complexity labs. The overwhelming majority opposed. They decided to table the issue entirely for that meeting. Interestingly, CAP still stated that they agreed that nurses should be able to direct high complexity labs, despite CMS already having tabled the issue. Now again, in March 2020, we drafted a letter to CLIA, I guess it was it? to CMS, I'm sorry, I can't see the screen with my glasses on. We were receiving reports of incidents in labs during CLIA inspections when the inspectors themselves were unfamiliar with their own regulations regarding histology and high complexity personnel. So we wrote a letter to CMS asking for clarification of CLIA complexity rules regarding histology, especially since the CLIA inspectors themselves seem to be confused about the regulations, presenting difficult situations for the labs. Unfortunately, we did not get a response from CMS. In November of 2022, once again, despite the overwhelming opposition allowing nurses to direct high complexity labs, the issue had returned. We again reiterated that NSH does not agree that nurses have adequate education or experience in the clinical laboratory setting to effectively direct a high complexity laboratory. And in a little while, you'll see that these efforts that we made worked and other groups made worked. In April of 2023, of course, we all know we are in a workforce shortage. I don't know of any labs that are running around bragging about being well-staffed. However, something that most laboratory professionals are probably not aware of, healthcare workers struggle the most with student debt. It is $10,000 more than any other profession. Now, this includes all healthcare professionals, but medical laboratory professionals are generally not eligible for federal workforce development programs, such as those administered by Health Research and Services Administration. This coalition letter that NSH signed on to urged Congress to adopt policies funding and expanding eligibility for federal scholarship, fellowship, and loan repayment programs for medical laboratory professionals, raise the visibility of careers in the medical laboratory, increase funding for training programs, and expand the National Health Service Corps Scholarship Program to include laboratory personnel. And then in June of 2023, the Department of Veterans Affairs requested information regarding histopathology technologists, a standard of practice. In response to this, NSH strongly urged the department to define the standard of practice for both histotechnicians and histotechnologists, as it is current practice for ASCP certification and in the few states where histotechnicians and histotechnologists are licensed. The terminology histopathology technologist is generally an unused term, as we know. The standard of practice should be in accordance with national certification and must include histotechnicians. So, September of 2023, finally CMS, this goes back to 2018 when I first went to CLIA and asked, that they bring histology under CLIA oversight. CMS requested information regarding histology personnel and CLIA after we first presented that back in 2018. And now we're at 2023, so you can kind of get an idea of how long these things can take. I'm going to read part of what was written in the Federal Register so you can get an idea of what a request for information might sound like. And this comes directly from the Federal Register. Slide staining and tissue processing have not been subject to CLIA regulations. However, we received inquiries from interested parties that slide staining and tissue processing are an essential part of the testing process for histopathology. Absent these steps, the tissue cannot be prepared, mounted on a slide, or accurately evaluated by a pathologist to make an assessment for diagnosis. And here is proof that what we are doing works. Without continuous pressure and input from NSH, CMS would not have even considered updating its regulations in regards to histology. They also requested information in regards to grossing. It is clear that definitions as to who is doing what kind of grossing are needed. Histotechs that meet high complexity requirements can gross, but there are no clear definitions as to different levels of grossing, simple versus complex, selective grossing versus submitting the entire tissue. We strongly recommended that clear, descriptive guidelines as to the complexity of grossing performed and who can perform them be established. This is the one that probably everybody's very interested in. November of 2023, the FDA released its proposed rule, Framework for Regulatory Oversight of Laboratory-Developed Tests. Anyone who has read the rule, which is now finalized, knows that the language is completely ambiguous, leading many histotechs wondering if IHC assays, special stains, or even H&E could be affected by this rule. I'm going to read an excerpt from our letter to the FDA regarding their rule. For example, it is NSH's belief that Class 1 IVD tests should not be considered in this LDT framework. Examples include diagnostic IHC antibodies, hematoxylin and eosin stain, and special stains, since these are considered adjunctive tests to determine a diagnosis. Current accreditation agencies, such as CAP, require daily quality control to ensure consistency of results for these Class 1 IVD tests. However, the ambiguity of the current framework has left laboratories wondering if certain Class 1 IVDs will be included. Class 1 IVDs are the bulk of most workloads in a histopathology laboratory. Applying the additional verification, validation described in the framework would cause additional technical time with an already compromised laboratory workforce, increase costs, and unnecessarily delay patient results. We had also recommended that the comment period be extended. Typically, it's usually like 60 days, somewhere in there. They gave us 30-day comment, 30 days to comment. So you can see sometimes how quickly we have to come up with, what we think on this, draft letters, draft a comment. And it can take a lot longer than that to research. We need to confer with allied organizations and actually draft a comment letter. The comment period was not extended, as we all know, and the FDA finalized the rule without congressional approval. Since then, 2 lawsuits have been filed, one by the ACLA and one by AMP, the Association for Molecular Pathology, both claiming that the FDA has overstepped their authority in trying to regulate LDTs. This, of course, it's an ongoing issue. We will keep everyone apprised as to any information we get as soon as we get it. Honestly, I think we're just as confused as everybody else as to what is going to fall under this regulation of laboratory-developed tests. And then in July of 2024, NSH signed on to the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act, along with more than 800 other organizations that comprise the Tomorrow's Workforce Coalition. The act would expand qualified expenses under the 529 Savings Plan to include post-secondary training and credentialing, such as licenses and professional certifications. And most recently, August of 2024, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they currently lump all medical laboratory professionals under like one umbrella term, one group. We signed onto a letter crafted by ASCP supporting differentiating medical laboratory professionals into what they actually do to provide more accurate coding and descriptions. So that's just kind of a more detailed rundown of some of the work that we've been doing over the years and, responding mostly to RFIs and open comment periods. I'm going to hand it over to Louis.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through a couple things and then try to drill down and talk a little bit about CLIAC and how we operate with those guys. I think one of the important messages that we've already heard is that these are almost always time sensitive. So we're getting notification. In the last year or so, many of the RFIs have come down. Instead of having the normal 60-day comment period, they've reduced it down to 30 days. The LDT is an example of that. Also, the nursing process as well, using it a little bit as a use case example, also had a very limited amount of time in terms that we could respond, but it was all the organizations responding and actually what ended up changing the direction in which CMS was working on it, but it still took 5 years. We have to be diligent in that time frame to make sure that we're paying attention to what's going on and being able to address any of these issues that may come up. So let me tell you a little bit how CLIAC works. This is where we've done a lot of work with CLIAC in terms of engaging them and things like that. CLIAC's main is a committee that is formed from the laboratory disciplines, different subspecialties within the laboratory disciplines. Their main role is to give advice to all the federal agencies that are involved with CLIA. That's CMS, the CDC, FDA, as well as HHS, the administration. And so they provide guidance, recommendations, documentation for changes to the standards, to the regulations, as well as provide advice on just general medical laboratory activities that are going on that might need to be addressed by CLIA and by the government. The committee is formed of 20 members, again, from different subspecialties. There is no representation from histology because histology is not recognized under CLIA. So we are somewhat lumped into a category called histopathology. The 20 members will serve on the committee for 4 years. There are ex officio members from FDA, CMS, all the federal agencies who are also on the committee, but they have no voting privileges in terms of what they're able to comment on in terms of the committee making voting on issues. The committee is free to create subcommittees, working groups, one that Claire had actually participated on, which was really, really great. These working groups are obviously going to include committee members, but they're also going to be able to take subject matter experts as well as other non-committee members to participate in the thing. And I don't know, it was a very large working group that you had, right? It was.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you know, the histology personnel was not a front and center issue.
Yeah, unfortunately,
so,
yeah. This is often the case. We get pushed to the side.
Yeah.
So in the last few years, what we've done is we've engaged in the CLIAC process. Essentially what happens is that by law, the charter of CLIAC is that they have to have at least one public meeting a year. They typically have 2 meetings a year, one in November, one in April. Since the pandemic, they've been now doing one virtual, one in person. The public must be notified of these meetings. I don't think they have a specific timeline, but it's usually a couple of weeks in advance of the actual meeting. This is where we get the agenda, which we actually get to see where we can actually participate in. We have a brief period of time to write a letter in response or for recognition or for whatever we may want to achieve in that particular meeting. That letter must be in place at the minimum 5 days before the actual committee meets. Once the committee meets, there's a whole agenda. It's published. All of this information is available as part of the public record. So anything that we've ever written, spoken about is all available for everybody to read. But the meeting will come to order. There will be reports from CDC, CMS, all those kinds of guys. And then they'll go into basically talking a little bit about whatever the working groups. There'll be some presentations. And then there'll be an open public comment period where you can read in your comments. I've done it, Claire's done it. You just stand up and you read basically the letter that you've submitted. And everybody does that. And then the public comment period for that particular session is closed. And then now the committee will begin to discuss whatever the issues may be. We've done this on a number of occasions. Most recently in 2023, we were there and we read into the record our comments, the things that we were concerned about, trying to get the personnel requirements updated under CLIA so that histology can be recognized as high complexity testing is one of our main pushes that we've been trying to do. Our comments were extremely well received. Again, you can go to the CLIAC website, look for that particular meeting, and you could see what the discussions were and what they said. They were all really, really positive. So we felt very strongly about, how the outcome of that particular meeting. Once the meeting once that process has taken place, the committee will meet at the end and submit a recommendation, okay? This was a recommendation that came out of the meeting that we attended where we had submitted our letter and made a lot of things. As you can clearly see, this has gotten distilled down quite a bit from what we were asking for. This is still a very positive result for us because they're talking about us and they're making recommendations to CMS, but it's really diluted down. This occurs for a number of different reasons. The single most important reason is that CLIAC and CMS and all the federal agencies may have other priorities that take precedent over what we're asking for. Also keep in mind that this is the federal government, right? They have a lot of inertia. They have to be concerned about budgets, the political environment, what's happening in the next year, and all those kinds of things. So resource allocation to move something forward in their agenda is something that they have to be aware of. Regardless, we were very encouraged by the positive feedback that we've gotten in this recommendation. The other thing that's really important to remember is that while this recommendation came out of the committee and went towards CMS and all that, CMS has no obligation to adopt any recommendation that comes out of it. It's still a decision that CMS, HHS, the FDA, all those organizations need to agree upon whether they're going to advance this recommendation or not. So the fact that this is out there does not mean that we've been successful necessarily. It just means that we've been successful in front of CLIA furthering our agenda. And again, this is just to give you an idea of the timeline of what we're talking about here. None of this happened. Anybody who's ever interacted with a local, state, or federal agency totally knows that they have so much inertia, so much movement going in one direction that to try to just nudge them in a slightly different direction takes a lot of effort. This has been, for us, has been an endeavor that's been going on since 2018 when Claire first started operating in this space. And we're going to continue to pursue this space. But it's important that we get everybody on board to make sure that we're addressing your concerns, not only the organization's concerns, but your concerns and things like that. So we absolutely want feedback from everybody in the audience about these things. You want to talk about?
This is just some of the professional organizations that we align with. Like Liz mentioned in the beginning, there's power in numbers, and the more allies you can have on your side. Obviously, ASCP is probably our strongest ally. We will sign on to letters crafted by them for issues that concern, obviously both groups. ASCLS, in a few slides, I'll mention the legislative symposium that they put on every year. COLA Workforce Action Alliance. NACLS, obviously, our accreditation for all of our histology schools. And then this is the Medical and Public Health Laboratory Workforce Coalition. All, obviously, many groups working together to help address the workforce shortages, the lack of training programs, the lack of funding for training programs, those kinds of things. And then something else that we do, and NSH sponsors typically every year to send somebody to this, the ASCLS lab. They call it the Labvocate Symposium now. It was the legislative symposium. And I attended this last year, I think it was last year. And I actually met with a legislative aide for Congressman Golden, who's a congressman from Maine, state I'm from. I've actually been able to get a relationship with his office. And I just kind of wanted to let everybody know, when I went on to Capitol Hill, I had no idea what to expect. I had an appointment to meet with this legislative aide. I had no idea how easy it is to go. I can't say about the senators, because I don't know if that building is handled any differently, but the congressional building, you can go in, you go through a little TSA checkpoint, obviously. Nobody asks you where you're going. If you have an appointment, you find your congressman's office. They all have signs outside the door saying, come on in, knock on the door, and go on in. It is really that easy to visit your congressman. And I kind of assume the senator's office, again, I don't know if that's quite the same. I get newsletters from my congressmen and senators. I've sent, action alert things, and you get on a mailing list. I've actually had a phone call from both my senator's office and then also from my congressman's office. They do listen. You wouldn't think so, but they do actually respond. Sometimes it takes time. And so now I'm just trying to nurture that relationship I have with the legislative aide. I just forward all of our position papers. Anytime something's coming up congressionally that we are concerned with, I say, hey, this is how we feel about it. We'd love your support, those kinds of things.
I just want to add one thing to this as well, that this symposium is really, really great to get you up to speed on the issues. The first day is really a review by a number of different organizations who have legal advice. They have lawyers who are lobbyists as well as advocating, and they'll prep you for everything. They'll get you ready to go and to talk about the issues like the SALSA Act or the LDT issue, so you can voice your concerns about what's going on with them. So it's a really great way to get yourself introduced into this type of activity where you're actually going and advocating for the profession. Just want to mention a couple of things as well that is also things that we've started doing as well in the last couple of years as well, in using it as a vehicle. There have been a couple of editorials that have gone out into the pathology community, a couple of them that we followed quite aggressively because we felt that they were really, really important that we address the issues that are being spoken about. One of them was this whole concept of whether immunohistochemistry should be viewed as a stain or an assay, and there's probably a discussion, open discussions continuously going on about those kinds of things. We felt that we needed a vehicle to express our concerns about these issues, and we thought, well, why not use the journal, which is, it's our journal. I mean, it's the Journal of the Histotechnology. So we've, in collaboration with the editor-in-chief and the editorial board, we approached them and said, look, we feel that we should be using the journal to perhaps discuss or put out into open comment into the public what we feel is important for us as an organization and as a discipline and as a profession. And so we've started to do that. We responded to a very prominent article, which was talking about immunohistochemistry as an assay that was published in Laboratory Medicine. No, not Laboratory Medicine. Archives of Laboratory Medicine. We've also done some webinar work on it, and most recently in the last issue, just before the meeting, we wrote up an editorial about what will it take for us to finally be recognized under CLIA, which is, I think, something that's really, really important for all of us, that's going to help elevate the profession, elevate everybody that's in this room that cares about what they're doing in here. Liz?
So what can we do as professionals? So join NSH, become active. There's really strength in numbers, and if the more individuals that we manage and support and do work for, the larger our voice will be. And we've worked really hard, but we're seeing progress.
Yeah.
We are really seeing progress. We see other organizations coming to ask us. We see individuals within the medical profession coming to ask us for advice and support. So what we're doing is working, but we know that it takes time. And we just have to be, and we keep pushing and keep pushing and keep doing things. So it's a constant kind of pressure to make sure we keep going forward, because if we don't keep going forward, it's just going to stop. So subscribe to your newsletters. There's a bunch of different newsletters. There's action alerts. ASCP has them, CLIA has them, CAP has them, the Federal Register has them. Because like I said earlier, you guys are our eyes and ears, because we can't be all-encompassing. We don't see everything. So if you see something or hear something, email the NSH office, post something on the block, contact one of us so we can take a look at it and assess it and see whether or not we need to address the situation or not. We can't do and comment on things if we don't know people are asking for information or if there's an issue within your state or anything like that. Share these action alerts, share our public policy statements with your colleagues. We have the NSH group on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and then if you are able, attend that Labvocate symposium. But the bottom line is we need to hear from you to make sure that if you hear about something that's important to you, that you contact us so we can address it.
I just want to add one quick thing. Also, we welcome your feedback. This is not about us up here. This is about all you guys sitting out in the audience, right? We're doing this, hopefully, we're doing this to promote the profession for all of you. So, your thoughts, your concerns, your issues are important to us. We need that information as well to make sure that we're advocating for what the organization and you as members really believe in. So that's important for us to get that information as well. Just, a couple of other, websites that are in there. This is all in your packet, stuff that you can go sign up for, register, visit, get some information, do some, reading and stuff like that. We, I think, all post stuff on the block as well, so that you'll see information going up there, especially with the LDT stuff that's coming. Everything that I see that comes across my desk about who's talking about this with LDT, different organizations, whatever, I try to put that all up on the block so that people at least have an avenue to go and get some answers, because we don't have any answers. And I don't think necessarily that any of these other organizations have answers either, but they're bringing things out into the open to talk about them. Just want to say one last thing. So we're going to be taking some questions. If whoever wants to ask questions, we have 2 microphones on the aisles, and at this point, we'll be happy to try and address any questions that anybody has. Otherwise, thank you for listening. Yeah.
Come on down. Should I ask if anybody wants to join the public policy? I just want to say one thing before we get to questioning. If any of you guys are interested in being a part of the public policy task force, please, contact us. The more people we have working on these policy statements, the better, the greater the bandwidth we'll have, because it's kind of hard when it's a small team of individuals trying to get all of this done. So if we have more individuals working on that task force, it's going to be beneficial for the organization and our profession in general.
Hi, I'm Deborah Horton. Anyway, I'm loud enough, I promise. The question about the LDT testing, how is that going to affect reimbursement of CPT codes? And if that is, can we not utilize the acknowledgement that it may affect cost reimbursement, affect the way companies run, as well as manufacturers who provide us this class 1 antibodies, and if they're going to call them now LDTs, the reason to spend that extra money on them versus just buying, you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of, is it driven not only by quality and stuff, but could it be also driven by cost and reimbursement as well?
Yeah, I don't think that it's going to affect reimbursement. What it may affect is whether you decide to keep the test or not, because some of the things that they come down with may be too onerous. The lab may decide they don't want to go through all the paperwork and regulatory issues. And that's really one of the discussions that's coming up is, okay, it's kind of a cost benefit. Maybe we'll send this to someone else instead of us going through all that hassle. Especially for the prognostic and therapeutic antibodies. If you have to go through a pre-market approval for a new one, that's an extremely expensive process. Even FDA is estimating anywhere from $150,000 to $2 million for one antibody, one test. So I think that reimbursement for the test is not an issue, it's whether you decide to keep the test.
My name is Sarah Wessel. I was just curious, is there any concern that requiring more licensure and higher education requirements may cause even further workforce shortages? Thank you.
Of course, there's concern that that might limit the workforce. However, everything that's been done to try to improve the workforce by multiple different organizations has not been successful at all either. I mean, every year you hear the same issue. The workforce is getting smaller. I think honestly believe that by setting these minimum standards for educational requirements will essentially force the issue to help elevate the profession, which will hopefully draw in more people. I think in the last year or so, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, within the last year and a half, I think we've seen a little bit of a perhaps a change in the direction. I think we're starting to see people, perhaps because of all the noise that we're making, we're starting to see people be more engaged in the histology community, potentially coming in and looking at this at careers. There were close to 190 newcomers at on Friday night, first timers attending the meeting. That's huge. I don't even know if we've ever seen a number that high for, and Aubrey, please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know. But I was just super impressed by that. And the engagement that we saw in the room that was there was really, really promising. So yeah, it might hurt us a little bit in the short term, but we're already hurting so badly that, we need to do something. And I think trying to bring attention, trying to elevate the profession, trying to get the younger generation interested in what we're doing and how we're doing it, and all the new technology that's out there. You guys are here to learn about that stuff. All of that really does require people to have a really good foundation in science and in biological chemistry and biochemistry and things like that. So I think that's really why we're approaching it this way. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question about the SALSA Act. I work in education, so I'd never heard of that. Can you give me a little information about what it's? I looked it up, but it just didn't. So is it just for 2-year programs, or is it just for certificate stuff that you mentioned earlier?
The SALSA Act is something that we are trying to, we as in ASCP, NSH, sort of a coalition of associations, are trying to push through Congress in response to PAMA. PAMA was the providing
access to Medicare.
Yeah, and SALSA stands for Saving Access to Laboratory Services Act, I think is what it stands for. So PAMA, when it was put through Congress, it's kind of and this is one of the things that I learned at the legislative symposium. CMS basically came up with PAMA, and they used data from what ended up being only like less than 1% of all hospitals in the nation. And they set up a schedule of reimbursement cuts based upon less than 1% of hospitals in the nation, data from them as far as reimbursement goes, which would, you can't really successfully do a whole schedule of reimbursement cuts, without taking into account all of the hospitals, or as many as you can. So every year that PAMA, I think there was actually even a lawsuit that somebody said, you guys, you'd use faulty data, basically, to come up with this fee schedule. And although it was agreed that the data was faulty, it didn't necessarily stop PAMA from being enacted. So every year since then, Congress has basically put a temporary halt on it, but this is coming up every single year. So what the SALSA Act will do, and this is one that is vetted and approved by laboratory professionals, professional associations, it will basically eliminate PAMA and bring in a new fee schedule based on accurate data from hospitals.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mary Patel. Thank you, panelists, for making such tremendous efforts and strides for the profession. I was just wondering.
Thank you.
I was just wondering what 1 or 2 call to actions that each member here can take to help support the advocacy in addition to some of the items that you mentioned. I think that we all have a responsibility to support the profession, so I'd like to take this moment to encourage everyone here to commit to that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. And as far as the ASCP action alerts go, they're super easy. If you sign up for them, they give you basically a form letter. If it's something that we're trying to, inform Congress, this is how we feel. You get a form letter. Once you input your address, They know exactly what state you reside in, so they know what senators and congresspeople that it needs to go to. And then basically it's click send and away it goes. But all of those comments count. You can see with the, they finally, CMS finally axed the letting nurses direct high complexity labs. That was because of the comments they received and the volume, the significant volume of comments they received. So, they do listen, but they are going to listen especially the more people that are expressing how they feel. And those action alerts are super, super easy. It takes 2 minutes, literally. Yeah.
Hi. I'm still pretty new. I've only been in histology for about 5 years, but I'm becoming more involved in trying to get more people into the career field. I'm really passionate about it. And so I started doing talks at my school, my kids' middle school and high schools about the career field, trying to get anybody coming from high school into college to go towards that. And I'd like to really lean into that more. And so like doing talks maybe at like the universities and things like that about the career field and having new people just out of college trying to go into that. Because I know a lot of people just kind of fall into histology and never heard about it or anything like that. Is there some sort of like NSH program or like movement towards like that I could join to do that in my area to help support that?
I understand her question.
I think that she wants to find a way that she can continue educating people about the profession and this
Like
NSH.
is there like through NSH?
Yeah.
Aubrey might.
I actually work for the NSH headquarters office. We don't have a specific program for that, but we absolutely have resources that you can use for career days. We have flyers that you can download and print. We have PowerPoints you can use and modify for your own self. And if we have other things that we can send to you and help you support those efforts, we absolutely can. We're also looking to try to expand histology programs, so once you get somebody excited, they actually have somewhere they can seek the education. I don't know if you know, but there's less than 50 histology programs in the entire country, and that includes online, which makes it hard to get somebody, they want to do it, and they can't get educated. So that's somewhere you could also support those efforts locally. Look to see if your local community college or university is willing to put those programs together, help teach those courses. So always reach out to the NSH office, and we're happy to support all of those efforts. Thank you.
Anyone else? I see somebody coming up. Oh, all right.
It's a race. Can I just ask you to really speak, because we're struggling a little bit to hear you. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi,
There we go.
Perfect.
my name is Joe. I'm brand new to IHC. I've only been working in the field for a year. Could you just speak a little bit about like how they handled testing before and then like after in terms of like LDT, just like a summary about like that whole, I guess, controversy?
Well, we don't really know the answer.
How we handle testing before and after LDT?
Like, because everyone's talking about like the FDA, like now you have to submit LDTs to FDA. Like I'm like a total newbie, so
Yeah.
it would be great if, I don't know if this is like inappropriate for this, but just
Well,
like
okay.
how before and after.
Right, so what occurred many years ago was that FDA has authority over vendors who produce medical devices. And an antibody is considered, or a DNA probe or whatever is considered a medical device. So FDA has authority over that, but they're primarily concerned with vendors who manufacture those and then sell them to us or to laboratories. Okay, so, and then CLIA, on the other hand, regulates laboratories and sets up the regulations for doing things like validations, or who can work in the laboratory, or who's a testing personnel, or something like that. So what FDA did was they, as far as histopathology goes, is they essentially used what they called their discretionary authority to essentially say that most antibodies they're not going to regulate. So if there's several classes of medical devices. Class 1 they call exempt. Okay, so they don't have to be regulated. because they're used in conjunction with many other tests to come to a diagnosis, so they're considered very low risk. In other words, if it's negative or doesn't work right, it's not a huge problem for making a diagnosis. They can do it over or whatever. And then there's class 2, which is, in class 3, which are more standalone type things, like a prognostic or therapeutic antibody. We've had maybe a dozen of those. They're used as standalone diagnostic tools to guide therapy and prognosis for a patient. And so they're basically, that one test decides a huge amount of treatment for a patient. But FDA has pretty much, I mean, the vendor has to go through pre-market approval for those. In other words, they have to do clinical trials, they have to do all kinds of things to prove that it works. But then the laboratory is still, all they have to do is validate it. They buy the antibody, they do their own validation, they use the vendor's validation, they may use the vendor's kits, and they do their thing. And the FDA has never touched laboratories. They never said that they're going to regulate laboratories because they don't manufacture anything. Okay, they don't produce the antibodies, they don't produce the kits, they don't make the machines or anything. But now FDA has come back, and it's primarily because of genetic testing, which is, genetic tests are very easy to make. Now you can synthesize DNA, you can synthesize probes, thousands of them a day if you want. And so laboratories all over the country have been using genetic testing that they develop in-house, they use in-house. Sometimes they have other people send them stuff, they test it, they're essentially selling it. And so now, and that kind of prompted FDA to start looking at testing, regulating laboratories as manufacturers, because all these laboratories were producing their own tests. So anyway, with this final rule, what they've come down and said that they're also going to regulate histopathology laboratories as part of that. And there's kind of two sets of that. One is if you do it manually, they're not going to bother you. In other words, if you do all the steps manually, they're not going to bother you. But if you have an automated machine applying the reagents, then they're going to call you a manufacturer.
Which makes no sense.
And so now you're going to have to eventually register as a FDA manufacturer, which costs money, and then you're going to have to list all the antibodies that you sell or that you use in your laboratory, and then they're going to try to, then what they want you to do is give them information about how well those work. Okay, so before we didn't have to bother with all of that, now we're going to have to bother with it. But it doesn't come into effect till May 2025, and if you were using those products before May 2024, they're not going to count those. In other words, you could still use those if you don't modify them at all. Any new antibodies or probes, then you're going to have to go through their LDT program. But when reading through the Federal Register, the comments and some of the answers that FDA gave to the comments, it sounds like they may give some more discretionary authority to class 1 type antibodies. In other words, they may only require minor reporting things and record keeping, which is not trivial for FDA. But for class 3, like all the prognostic therapeutic, they may, even though you buy it from a vendor, you use their machine, you use all their kits, they may still force the laboratory to go through FDA regulatory approval, which will cost money and time and effort. So anyway, that's kind of the difference. Before we weren't bothered by FDA, now we're going to be bothered by FDA.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you again. My name's Claire. I wanted to circle back to the push for certification and education in histology, and I think it is great. I'm in fully support of it. But I know there are a lot of facilities that have developed their own histology training programs just to fill their workforce, and people are trained on the job. Would there be, if it was certification only, would there be any functions that these on-the-job trained people could perform without degrees, or are there efforts for these facilities to collaborate with local NACLS programs and schools to get these people certifications?
I don't think that on-the-job training is wrong or bad.
I'm on the job
Yeah,
training. Yeah,
my employees are
90% of
trained
people
on
are
the
on the job
job with the
training.
hope that they will sit for an HT or HTL exam. That's how I manage my staff. But I do require, you know, I'm going to hire somebody who has a bachelor's or associate's degree, so I make that commitment up front to make sure that they have that degree before I hire them into like a research associate position. But then they're trained. And if they enjoy what we do, if they enjoy histology, I provide them with the tools necessary to take the, you know, to learn and study for the exam. That's my goal. I'm not sure how, and then we do have the histology training program, which is an online program to help support that. I think it's, you know, when any, like we talked about, when any of these changes happen, they take forever to get done. So, people will know years ahead that if we're going to require an individual to have an associate's or a bachelor's degree to perform histology, there's always going to be an on-the-job training route. I don't think that's going to go away.
No, there
So
aren't
for
enough
the
schools.
like tasks and functions that they might be able to do, people that aren't certified, like lab aides, for example, that embed, would that still be, like, where are we drawing the line?
I don't know, yeah.
I think that's going to depend on when CLIA, CMS actually sit down and look at the individual processes that occur in histology and actually assign them a complexity, like they do in clinical, you know, laboratory. Right now, CLIA does not even consider what we do to be testing. They call it processing. So they don't, there is no complexity assigned to it because it's a process. It's not a test as far as they're concerned. So I think that what you're asking may sort of depend on if and when, hopefully when, they sit down and look at individual processes in like embedding, like sectioning, like special stains, IHC, that sort of thing, where they fall in that complexity scale.
I just want to add one thing that I think is also really important about all of this is that one of the things that positions that we've kind of taken in our arguments is that, you know, the organization CLIA doesn't look at what we look at it as processing, right? But our position is that it's the total test, right? It's not the individual steps, it's the entire test that's important. And so just because we're grossing here does not eliminate the contribution or the significance of the grossing at that particular step. It's part of the entire testing process, and that entire testing process is highly complex. And to isolate it and break it down and say, no, this is not, we feel is a problem, right? And I think that's more so what we're trying to address by saying, okay, if we set a set of minimum standard educational requirements, of course you need to be on the job trained. You need to know what the processes are in that particular institution and how they operate and how they work. But here's the minimum requirements that we need. If you're going to be doing this type of work, this is what you need to know. And if you're going to be doing high complexity work, then this is what you need to know. And from there, you're free to do whatever you want and push your career forward or not, or just stay where you are. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is not a question. This is, my name is Trey. I work with the Educators Committee here at NSH, and there were a few questions about the education and the licensure requirements. And this has all happened before. On the MLT side, this whole thing has happened before. When the on-the-job training became a degree requirement, when it was considered the high complexity testing. Over time, that change occurred. There were grandfathered people who had been on the job trained, but new techs coming in had the requirements to follow. We are working on building more histotech programs, setting specific performance and objective standards, trying to define those categories better so that when we have that education and licensure requirements, that they're being supported. And coming from that top down, that clear requirement, that change, that is what gives state governments the ability to produce more of these programs by specifically defining it instead of things as they've been doing, just saying we can just let nurses do it. It's not really testing. So by having these standards set, it creates an environment that fosters more education, better qualifications, but it's not going to just drop somebody off.
Yeah.
This has happened before,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
it has worked.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks. Yeah.
Great comment.
I'm going to give you a second to conclude, and then we're going to free the room to the vendor hall.
Conclude.
We're done? No. Just kidding. We're not done. We have a long road ahead of us. We want to thank you all. We want to encourage you guys all to participate. Even if you're just coming up, asking us questions, talking to us, giving suggestions, everything helps. Try to respond to action alerts, try to be engaged, and we look forward to seeing you all throughout the meeting and just talking to you guys.
And you can find us all on the blog.
Yeah.
Email anytime.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.